Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another episode of The Package Tourist, hosted by yours truly, the Package Tourist and the magical mystery tour called Life, Matthew DiBiase. Tonight's guest is sports author Kirk McKnight. Kirk lives in Washington State, and he is the editor of the Wahkiakum County Eagle newspaper since February of this year. Before that, he worked as a writer and later editor for the Wickenburg Sun in Arizona. But when he is not editing newspapers, Kirk is also a sports author with two books to his credit. His first book, The Voices of Baseball, the game's greatest broadcasters reflect on America's pastime, was released in 2015. And his second book, The Voices of Hockey, broadcasters reflect on the fastest game on earth, was released in 2017. Tonight, we will pay tribute to his writing career. Kirk, welcome to the show. It's a great honor and privilege to have you here. I'd like to start off, let's talk about yourself. Let's begin at the beginning. Where were you born and raised, and where did you go to school?
Well, I was born in southern Utah, but that was just for a discount because my family was living in Vegas. So I was raised in Vegas, lived there 42 years of my life, and then during COVID, we sold our house and bought an RV and traveled the country for a little over a year. And we've basically settled down in Wickenburg. We're there for about 3 years. Wickenburg's about 50 miles west of Phoenix. And then we moved to a little town on the Columbia River up here in southwest Washington called Capilano. We've been here about 9 months.
Okay. Where did you go to college, Kirk?
I went to BYU in Provo, Utah.
Okay. Now, what led you to get involved in journalism?
Well, when I was writing my books on baseball and hockey broadcasting, I realized that, unless you're like on the top tier as far as authors like Stephen King or Anne Rice or somebody like that, you're really not paying the bills just solo as an author. But I thought if I could go into journalism, at least I could keep writing, keep, selling my books, but maybe turn writing on a continual basis into an everyday job. And that's why I started going after journalism and working in newspapers.
Okay. Now, Kirk, you're an editor. Do you edit the entire newspaper or just a certain specific section of the newspaper you work for?
I try to edit whatever's sent in to us. There's a couple of us on staff to kind of help out a little bit as well because it's a 12 to 16 page paper. So not only am I editing, but I'm also writing several articles. So I don't necessarily edit everything. I get a little help here or there. But I try to oversee everything that goes to print and to make sure that everything is in tip-top shape.
Okay. Now, Kirk, both of your books deal with broadcasters. What led you to pursue that specific topic?
I wanted to write something on sports, specifically with the baseball book. I wanted to write something on the venues and how they're different from each other. And I thought to myself, there's other books out there that kind of talk about one ballpark to the other, and it's more like one of those Fromer's guides where if you want this, go to section 217 above the third palisade and concourse number 2 and all these other things. And I thought, how about if I do it in a fun way and discuss more the history and how the differences in the ballparks kind of play into the history? And who better than the broadcasters to discuss history? So that idea came about, and my friends in the publishing business, to, for lack of a better phrase, flipped over the idea, and the momentum continued from there. So it was basically the thought of using the broadcasters. It kind of made it stand out. It made it kind of more of an original starting point.
Okay. Now, Kirk, how difficult was it in arranging and interviewing the broadcasters featured in both of your books?
Honestly, they're pretty gracious people, and once you start talking to them and start to say what your platform is, a lot of times they're very agreeable with it. That helps, and also a media relations department that's willing to communicate with you is another very helpful thing. So there were only a couple of interviews that I did not land over the two books, over 115 broadcasters interviewed. And so I think they're very gracious, and the difficulty may be in keeping up and keeping up with the times as a nonfiction book can be a difficult way in that. And so re-interviewing and transcribing can be a timely thing to do. But
Yes.
actually gathering the interviews, I think they're pretty gracious, and for the most part, there were some that I had to work a lot more than others. But these guys are very giving of their time, especially if it's something that they feel is for a good cause or a good idea. And I think I encounter that a lot with a lot of the broadcasters.
Okay, Kirk. Please share with our audience and name some of the notable baseball broadcasters you're able to interview for your first book. Share it with our audience.
Vince Scully's at the top of that list.
Wow.
Bob Uecker as well. Dick Enberg. These are all three who have passed away, but I interviewed them while they were still living.
Wow.
Tim McCarver is another one who passed away. Joe Buck and Charlie Steiner, John Sterling, John Miller, Marty Brenneman. A lot of Hall of Famers come to mind, and Bob Costas, if I haven't already mentioned him.
Okay. Now, let's talk about, please name some of the notable hockey broadcasters you were able to interview for your hockey book.
Doc Emmerich is probably at the top of that list as far as notable and recognizable names. And Marv and Kenny Albert are both two personalities I interviewed that a lot of people know about because of the national spotlight for both of them. Gary Thorne's another one. Mike Lang, especially for those who are in the Pittsburgh audience, will recognize that name. And Bob Miller for the Los Angeles Kings fans out there.
Okay.
Those are some of the Hall of Famers there.
Now, when you were interviewing these broadcasters, are these strictly play-by-play men, or did you also interview color men and color women too?
Yeah, there were color in there. They really help out with the setup because at the time they discussed their duties as a color commentator, which really helps because it gives you an idea of what a broadcast entails, especially if a game or a series, if it's the playoffs, is about to end. Their job, while the other guys are in the booths, is to get to that locker room, to get to that next thing, because the TV stations are going to cut to them and they're going to be interviewing players. So that's very important to the overall broadcast. The play-by-play, obviously, in between those moments and introducing the game in the pregame and even possibly post-intermission back into the game action and anything like that. Obviously, those are all part of it. But another big, huge part are those commentators, those color commentators, and how they put a bow on it and finish the broadcast.
Okay, Kirk. Name some of the key sports moments that were discussed in your two books.
Well, Vince Scully really cleared the board with some of the more important moments in baseball. He called Hank Aaron's 715th home run that passed Babe Ruth. That's obviously a key moment. John Miller called Barry Bonds hitting 71 and 72 during the 2001 season, and then during the 2007 season, hitting 756 to pass Hank Aaron. So those are some of the key moments in baseball. Some of the key moments in hockey reflect against Wayne Gretzky passing Gordie Howe for the all-time hockey goals list, and that was called by Gary Thorne. Other very notable moments would have to be, the Devils winning their first Stanley Cup. That's called by Doc Emmerich on the National Spotlight, a team that he had broadcast for during the regular season as well. He just happened to be able to call them to their Stanley Cup championship. And Alex Ovechkin scoring his 800th goal, courtesy of John Walton's call in Chicago a couple of seasons back.
Okay. Now, when you interview these broadcasters, how do they describe when they tell you to discuss the aspects of their job? What were the best aspects they described to you? In other words, what was really good about being a broadcaster? What were the best aspects of being a broadcaster as they described it to you?
I mean, a lot of times this was what these guys dreamed of doing. They won't be the last to admit, basically saying they'd be the first to admit that they perhaps realized at some point in their life, as much as they loved the sport, they weren't going to compete in it. And so the next best thing for them was to be able to be the voice and call these games. And so that is one thing that goes into their craft every day, is the fact that they love the sport and they love to be able to be a part of it. And they're grateful for their jobs every day that they go in there. And if they end up calling a Stanley Cup winning game or calling a World Series or whatever it is for both crafts in both sports, it's just icing on the cake.
Okay. Now, did they ever discuss the worst aspects of the job? If so, how did they describe them to you?
They don't necessarily, some of these things off the record, but a lot of times what happens is some of the worst aspects of the job for a broadcaster is with new buildings and new structures. The broadcasters used to be more of a center focus as far as the way the game is called, but when you see some of these ballparks and these new arenas being built, they push the broadcasters farther away from the action to where they're not as personable, or not necessarily, I don't want to say personable, but not eye to person as far as calling the game, seeing the back of the jerseys, having to really focus and really depend on certain things, and maybe even having to defer to the monitor. These are some of the challenges that came with these new buildings, and going from a building like Tiger Stadium, like a ballpark like old Tiger Stadium, and being right on top of the action, to now being not only recessed back from it, but up a level or two from it, where you don't have that intimacy as you used to have.
Okay. Now, do your books go into the difference in TV broadcasting as opposed to radio broadcasting?
Yes, they do, because a lot of times you'll see a broadcaster maybe transition from one to the other. I think the TV broadcasters recognize their role. I think the radio broadcasters have more of a recognition of their role, knowing the fact that the person that is listening to that, the audience that's listening to that, isn't seeing what they're seeing. So they have to provide that snapshot and to put them in the seat, as Rick Riz said, is put them on that third baseline and in that seat watching the action. That's what your job is to do, and if you're not doing it, you need to do it better. That isn't necessarily a Rick Riz quote as far as them not doing it, but needing to do better. But he did say, can we put them in that seat on that third baseline so that they can basically tell and visualize the action, as we call it.
Okay. Now, when you were talking to these broadcasters, are there any common traits or habits or characteristics they seem to embody collectively?
I think a lot of them, for the most part, try not to rehearse or plan what they're going to say because they're afraid of coming off as corny. Sometimes they'll write their notes and just find a way to wedge it in there and have it be part of it, but a lot of times they try to almost go in blind, just so that they can make it as organic of an experience as they can. And I think that is a trait that a lot of them share, is don't try to prepare phrases, don't try to, plan out what you're going to say, because it's not going to come natural, it's going to be very inorganic, and it's probably going to turn the audience off.
Okay. Now, Kirk, when you spoke to the very notable broadcasters like Vin Scully and Euchre, in your opinion, what were the secrets to their greatness? If you could isolate certain qualities into what makes a great broadcaster, in your opinion, what are those qualities?
I think Vin Scully taught the rest of the world in all sports just how great a storyteller or broadcaster can be, and to understand their limits. And Vin was able to just make an art of broadcasting and storytelling while on the broadcast. There's a story about Jerry Royce on the Dodgers, on the pitcher's mound. The inning is kind of drawing to an end, And when you're at Dodger Stadium and Vin Scully is your announcer, you're going to look out to the crowd. You're going to see a lot of people with the transistor radio held in their hand and posted up against their ears. And Jerry had a sense that these guys were really involved in the Vin Scully story, so he kind of kicked around on the mound a little bit, gave a little extra time. This was before the pitch clock, so it was kind of a way to allow Vin to finish that story. But the truth of it all is Vin always knew how to wrap up a story regardless of the flow and everything like that, because he just had a natural ability. And so I don't really think he necessarily needed Jerry Royce's help, but I guess it doesn't hurt, though, does it?
Right. Now, Kirk, have you ever done broadcasting work yourself, or have you ever aspired to be a broadcaster?
No, I don't like the sound of my voice. I don't like hearing my voice when when I myself am recording something. But also, I feel like I am not as concise as a broadcaster needs to be. I feel like that I am very long-winded sometimes. You can tell by some of my answers that I can kind of rattle on a little bit. And that's a discipline a broadcaster has to hone and has to hold to their own broadcast, to their own vehicle. So I don't think it ever really crossed my mind to do that.
Actually, Kirk, you underestimate yourself. Actually, you're doing fine with the interview. I love your answers. You're quite eloquent, really. You're doing great. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, no, seriously, truthfully, yeah. Getting back, what are the key differences in broadcasting baseball as opposed to broadcasting hockey?
One of the things about baseball is baseball can take as long as 20 minutes for a top of the inning, or 2.5 minutes. It's something that you just never know, and so you go into it basically thinking to yourself, prepare for anything. Hockey is the same way, but hockey does not have the breaks in between. It doesn't have the pauses in between while the pitcher is going back to the stretch or is walking around a little on the mound or having a conference with the catcher and the manager. It slows down the pace a little bit, so the broadcasters are able to be in a little bit more relaxed sense. Obviously, also, broadcasters on the radio can relay that message in a way that helps to create the moment a little bit more. I was sitting in a broadcast on the radio, and we were having the story, and obviously I could see the play unfolding, but to finish up the conversation we were having, it was like a little bit of a delay in calling it, because he knew what to call and what was happening, but it was also a matter of finishing up the exchange that we were having. And that's a very beautiful talent to have with a broadcaster. They can do that so that they can pay the attention and give the due diligence to what they're doing and having a conversation during an inning or during a broadcast, but also be able to convey the action that is going on, even if it is after the fact. It keeps it seamless, it keeps it flowing, and it's an art that I wish I could bottle up and sell, because you don't see it anywhere else.
Okay. Now, Kirk, whenever I interview an author, I always love to ask the standard question. Who were your favorite authors when you were growing up? And of those favorite authors, did any of them light the spark inside you to become a writer, or perhaps influence your writing style?
Growing up, I think my favorite authors were different. Storytelling, I always thought Stephen King was such a master storyteller, but he's not my favorite writer. Thomas Harris, I loved his stories. I loved his dialogue. That was one thing that I feel Stephen King never really mastered, was the art of dialogue with the characters. He's great at everything he does, and he he is great at painting the picture, but I feel the flow and the conversations. And I'm guessing that he would be the first to admit that too. But not to say that he's bad at it, but some broadcasters, some authors are a lot more concise and eloquent with it. And that kind of flow is something that is truly special. So when you have somebody like Thomas Harris, who's acknowledged on the things that he's writing about, and he can create these fictitious characters and have the flow the way it is, and have the dialogue that is taking place not be too wordy, to be the right amount so that the point gets made and the story still flows. That is one thing that I truly like about Thomas Harris. Now, is it something I do myself? Not really, especially in screenwriting. I try to make it. I try to make the dialogue brief whenever I write a screenplay, but I still see it trailing off and not getting to the point enough, and not getting into and out of a scene enough. Okay. So that's the writing side of it. Now, as far as writing books and everything like that, Thomas Harris would definitely be at the top of my list as far as somebody who had my respect across the way. The greatest writer I've ever read is a gentleman named Nick, and I'm going to mess up his name, but it's Nick DiBiase. I've never seen better, more beautiful prose and word artistry in my life. Now, is it my favorite stuff to read? No. But is there anything better written and better put, more eloquently put? No.
No, it's amazing you mentioned Nick DiBiase. I loved his book on Sonny Liston, and also his biography of Dean Martin. He's a poet. He's a poet too. He did great poetry readings and all of that. I mean, he could do sum up a thing. Sometimes just a simple bare line, and he can convey an enormous amount. Just a small, very brief sentence in some ways.
Yeah, and Johnny Depp, on the back of, I think it was King of the Jews that Nick DiBiase wrote, and on the back of the book, just this slight endorsement from Johnny Depp saying, I read everything Nick DiBiase writes. And I'm like, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, right. Okay, Kirk, please tell our audience, where can readers find your books?
You can find it on Amazon. The Voices of Hockey just came out on Audible with a brand new and updated edition that features everything up through the 23-24 season. So all the editions of my books, all three of my books, are on Amazon. I strongly recommend the Audible edition of the Voices of Hockey as opposed to the paperback, because it's a lot more action-packed. It's got about 40% newer material and additional material, and it features 65 broadcasters. Okay. The updated edition of the Voices of Baseball is also available on Amazon. You'll see it. It's the blue book with Vin Scully by himself on the cover. That includes an excellent tribute to Vin Scully. Okay.
Kirk, do you have a website? And if so, please tell our listeners, where can they find it?
You can find me on Instagram. It's basically at the Voices of Baseball. You can also follow me or add me as a friend on Facebook. But those, and LinkedIn also, you can always connect with me on LinkedIn. I have a profile on all three of these.
Okay. Kirk, what is your next book project, and when can we expect its release?
I feel like if I'm going to do another Voices book, I'd like to do one on the Voices college football. And whether or not, when you can expect it to be released, it becomes a matter of how soon this becomes my everyday job as well.
Okay.
So if the Voices of Hockey can blow up on Audible and really make it more worth my time to continue to do this project, I definitely would love to touch on the Voices of college football. I think that would be a very interesting book. I think it would carry on a lot of traditions. It would tell and it would cover this entire country, and college football is one of the more beautiful sports behind the scenes. Not just what's on the gridiron, but what is actually in the seats, what is happening around the campuses, and what are the traditions that are carried out year after year. Those kinds of things definitely deserve a voice, and I definitely deserve to be mentioned and spotlighted in a book.
So you're not interested in like pursuing like NFL football or NBA basketball? You know, since you've already done NHL hockey and Major League Baseball, you're not interested in those two?
I really don't feel. I mean, the NFL football. Obviously, NFL is the most popular thing in the world, but I don't necessarily see the attraction for me. My heart is not in it. I used to love the NFL. I used to love the NBA. I no longer do, and so the passion won't be there for me, and that's why I just don't see it happening.
Okay.
Now, if somebody were to say, "Well, offer me a suitcase of money," sure, I'll write it. But like the passion's not there for me right now to write on either of those sports. I don't have it in me, and I don't really know where I could go like I could with baseball and the ballparks, and then with hockey and the insanity that happens. Football is pretty, football and basketball are pretty, they're I don't know, they're pretty predictable compared to some of the things that you see in hockey, and they're also pretty uniform as far as the settings when you think of baseball and things like that. So I don't see where my inspirations could start to run wild, and with that limited possibility, I feel that really just kind of shrinks my brain space as far as the potential of a book like that.
How about college basketball?
College basketball I could see doing, yes. There are traditions there, yes. I definitely think that if I were to do one, I would have to do the other as well, because it's in a more intimate environment, probably about 1/6 the amount of attendance, but the traditions are there. There are so many stories. There's so much beauty about college basketball and college football. I fear for the future of the sport, just with everything in the direction it's going. But I still feel the tradition is definitely worth reporting on. So yes, I think that would be another one that I would be interested in pursuing.
Kirk, I want to thank you so much for appearing on the show. And when you come out with your next books, please let me know. You're always welcome on my show, Kirk, okay?
Thank you, and I appreciate you having me on.
It's a great honor and privilege. You take care.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Stay tuned, ladies and gentlemen, for next week's show, where I will be interviewing author B.R. Williams. Thank you and good night.